Hello folks and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am your host Sasha and today I'm bringing you an awesome Halloween themed collab. This project was hosted by the lovely Krystal's Fantasy and this is our very own Demon XL collab, so extra large. Every participant had to customize one of the 17 inches tall Monster Eye or Ever After Eye doll, so it's a big one, quite literally. Other participants include, and I'm sorry about my accent, so Steffu Dolls, Blurred Colors Art, Lady Dynamite Creates, Krystal's Fantasy of course, our host, Josephine's Creatures, Claude Dolls, Arlie's Dollhouse, Diamonds Crafts, The Adder Dolls, Jackie O, and of course me, Kay's Oak Fantasy. And of course, everyone and their YouTube channel will be listed in the description box below, and that includes those who did not made it for the group pictures, so please go take a look after you're done watching this video. I'm honestly blown away by all of those creations, and these are lovely people that do deserve to be seen. And with that said, let's get into it. Alright, so for this doll I decided to channel an original character of mine. This character is not a demon per se, but actually more of a fallen angel, and this I think is going to be right up my alley. So I precise though, this is not a religious character, but more of a fantasy-inspired one. For this I chose Draculaura, and as you can see by my hand, she's a big one. Over approximately 40 cm-ish to be exact. I am not going to remove her head, and while because it can be done, it's also very hard. So instead, I elected to start cutting her hair and make it as short as I could. My character is more of a genderless kind of person, so very delicate but also androgynous, so I decided to remove their boobs, and for that I used my Dremel tool but off camera. I posted a picture of that on the group because I found it to be interesting to see the inside of the joint, but I creeped everyone out by doing so I guess socializing is hard. I'm sorry. I will use some epoxy sculpt, which is a kind of epoxy clay, to hide the surgery scars, but first though, I fill the cavity with loosely packed bits of aluminum foil. This is so I won't use the mobility of the joint by accidentally putting in too much clay. Once done, it needs to be set aside to air dry for 24 hours. Then it can be sanded without problem and painted to match the doll's skin tone. The first big thing I wanted out of the way was the wings. It's not my first time making angel wings, but these are going to be significantly bigger. I sketched them out and then I started working on the rough armature with aluminum wire. I added some supports using a smaller wire, and then I've woven in some tiny jewelry box hinges at the base. These will ultimately be screwed on the doll's back. I've used a bit of duct tape to strengthen it and also to cover the pointy bits. It's mainly so I will not injure myself. Then I covered part of the armature with black ribbon. It was a bit of an optional step, but I wanted to make sure that the base was solid as I will cover it with fabric next. I used some glue to hold the fabric, but I still went over after with some stitching, mainly for strength. I don't care if it looks rough at this stage because I will cover it with feathers. As an effort to save money, I bought a whole boa instead of craft feathers online, and I honestly would not recommend it. It made a huge mess, and the feathers weren't as nice, and it's hard to see on camera, but it did stain my fingers a bit. I am hot gluing these directly on the wings, starting at the bottom and going my way up, so I can hide both the glue and the armature. As you can see, it's a bit of a mess again, because these weren't the nicest feathers available, but they do look good enough for me, so I was pretty happy to move forward. They're a bit big to fully show on camera though, so I'm sorry if the framing is a tad clumsy. Acetone can melt through plastic, and I wasn't sure if it would damage the doll's head, because it's not quite the same material as what I'm used to. So, to make sure to not risk it, I kept the towel damp with water on the side, just to wipe out the extra acetone as soon as I was done cleaning. After it was done, I jumped right into my favorite part, which is the face-up. As usual, I had previously primed the doll's face with a couple layers of Mr. Super Clear Sealant. Then I roughly sketched the eyes and started working on the skin tone and the blushing using various brushes, including makeup brushes and some soft pastels. As with all my other videos, the materials that I'm using are listed in the description box below. The aim here is to layer in pigment, using the sealant to both prime the surface and protect your progress. When you feel like the color stops building, or if you want to start on a fresh base, you can add a new layer of MSC. It works best if you spray thin layers, and then let it dry completely for a good 20 to 30 minutes. It's also best to use it when humidity is low, as it can be a little bit finicky. I usually take my time with the pastels, well, mainly pastels, to contour, shade, highlight, and I build intensity slowly, usually taking about 2 to 3 different layers. The sketch will fade a little underneath it all, but since those are just guidelines, I think it's actually a good thing, well, for me, for my style. For this doll specifically, I wanted to stay in the realm of more nude colors for the whole face. I use a lot of pinks, of oranges, creams and corals, and I tried to keep it well blended and overall soft. The eyes are the focal point on this design. The characters have big downturned eyes that look both sad and innocent. Their eyes are a grayish green, and I wanted them to pop without them being too saturated. For all those finer details, I am using watercolor pencils and I use them dry. We use these over normal colored pencil in this hobby mainly because they are water-based instead of oil-based, and it works better with the sealant and it minimizes the risk of staining the base doll. Some do use them with water, but it's a personal choice, and personally I like the control the pencils have given me at this stage. I find the eyebrows to be a bit hard for me, especially when it comes to symmetry. It's like the best I can do is distant cousins, and I think it's because I tend to hold the doll at an angle and I'm not very tall, so I always start them with pastels and I use an eraser to shape them until I think that they look related enough. It may not be noticeable, but there's a fold in there on the sculpt of the doll's face that I was fighting against the whole time, and mistakes were made. And I was kind of hoping that it would somewhat turn okay as I kept going, and it did not work as good as I expected it to, but you'll see, I don't think it ended up being bad either. As the eyes were going to be the focal point of the face, I decided to try my hand at very fluffy eyelashes, and I was moving pretty slow actually, trying to be careful with each lines. There are some BGD artists out there that I love and that are putting these off, and I'm in love, so it inevitably inspired me. Once I am happy with both the pastels and the pencils, I move on to paint after applying a fresh layer of sealant. I use mainly watercolor and gouache paints as they are easy to work with and very easy to erase if I make a mistake. I use them to add finer, more crispier details and a bit of texture, and for that I have a very long and thin nail art brushes. I spent a long time on this step. That doll was a much larger canvas than what I'm used to, but I also wanted to have those brow hairs and eyelashes as nice and fluffy as I could. I think I might try to do that more often because in the end, I absolutely love the result. At the end, in between the final few layers of MSC that I added to protect the finished face, I added a dusting of gold mica powders on some part of the face. I had to layer it a bit because the sealant is very matte. I finished by adding a high gloss varnish on the lips and voila! I think it's my new favorite face up. With the face done, I decided to move to the hair, which was going to be the first big challenge of this project. It was also a bit awkward to film with my setup, so I tried my best. I mainly use yarn as hair, and it was very hard to get the color I wanted first, which is a peachy color with hints of blonde and gold and yeah, I had no luck finding something with the right color and texture that I wanted, so I settled for the next best thing, which was a warm pink that I had bought for an upcoming project. I glued the hair directly on the doll's scalp using Podge, which is becoming my new best friend in this craft. I had a couple of glued wefts, but nowhere near enough, so I kept going by gluing loose bundles of hair to finish the head. You may also notice that this hair is actually quite young, and it is. And this was another challenge. The character has very long waves of hair, and if you use yarn yourself, you are certainly familiar that there seems to be like a limit of how long you can make hair with that material. And I stubbornly tried to go against it by refusing to use a brush on any of that yarn. And to achieve that, I unraveled the individual strands of yarn and I flat ironed them first, before pulling gently on the fibers to break and separate them so they become more delicate. I've used this pulling technique a few times yet, and honestly it's great to maximize yarn length and also to mix different colors of yarn together to have a custom blend. As I said before though, this color was not quite right, so I did use the same pulling technique I talked about before to mix my own blend. Though to get to this point that I wanted it to be, I sacrificed all that length, so I decided to use those shorter wefts only on the top of the head. With some luck, these will blend in nicely when I style the hair. To make a clean part, I glued the wefts on the opposite side of where I wanted them to go. When it's gonna be dry, I'll be able to flip them back on themselves and hide the glue. When everything was dry, I went in section by section with my flat iron. I made sure the hair was covering the whole head well, and I removed a bit of excess thickness. Again, I did not use any sort of brush or comb, just my hands and that old flat iron, which I think is probably as old as I am. I was very pleased with the result, and that yarn is incredibly soft. And as for what I removed, well, don't worry, I saved all I could in case I would need it for another project. To form the waves in the hair, I used the popular method of the metal chopstick. It is heated in my flat iron, and I use it to shape the yarn. It took a few hours, but the result proved me that it was well worth it. I put the earrings in prematurely just to show a friend, but could not remove them, so here, hair and unexpected earrings. And to help smooth some of the fibers, I used a bit of clean water and a small amount of air gel. Now we can start on the clothing. I had no set plans in mind, but when I saw that necklace part in my things, I thought it would be quite nice to use it to make a halo crown. I folded the ends on themselves to make it a bit shorter, and then I used some aluminum wire to attach it to another half circle that would be the one that holds the halo crown on the head. Since it had some pointy bits that I would likely have it get caught in any doll's hair, I would cover the ends with a protective layer of hot glue before adding some gold paint to the part that weren't gold. I could not find any pepper roses in the size and colors that I wanted at my local craft store, so I decided to try something one of my friends sent me, which is foam clay. It was my first time trying that kind of clay. It's not too unpleasant to the touch, doesn't stain, dries in about 30 minutes and it stays flexible and lightweight. It also doesn't shrink, and I think it's an awesome thing to add to my arsenal. I used it to make a few roses to decorate the crown. I've added a lot of tiny beads and charms to it, as well as the roses that I made, and I ended up with a beautiful piece that does remind me of the headdresses worn by tribal belly dancers. For clothes again, I had no plan, so I went with what inspired me in the spur of the moment. I had that grey ribbon that I bought years ago, and I decided that it was time. After trying various shapes, I folded the ribbon in half thickness-wise before sewing it into loops. I would then use 2 of these, one around each arm, and have them meet in the middle to make the top, holding them in place using a third band, this time around the waist. For some reason, on my mannequin Gouache doll, this gave me big Star Wars vibes, but this did not translate to the finished doll, so don't worry. To add to the flair and drama, I picked up one of my beautiful laced tulle fabric and I decided to make a kind of half skirt or maybe more like a train. Well, unsure what words are best, but I made that. I thought about gathering it and maybe sew a ribbon to its edges just to make it look cleaner. As I was working on the train, I also finished sewing the top, doing a final few adjustments like adjusting a bit the length of the waistband and some lace and ribbon. I did not add any closure to it though because I intend to sew the finished garment on the finished doll at the end, doing any tiny adjustment that I need to have a perfect fit. I ended up choosing a black satin ribbon for the train trims and I think this was the right choice. The little bow that I sewed and added on top of it is also a nice bit of detail. I pinned it a few times on the doll to see how it looked and where it was going, and I think I like it. I like where it's going. This is also where I decided that a corset could look nice, so I used some mock-ups cut from craft foam to test just how small or big I wanted it to be. I used this faux leather to make it, which is similar in colors to one of the color of the roses that I use in the crown. After making sure that the size was good and that the cut was clean, I marked where I wanted the holes to be before thinking about adding some trims to decorate the corset. I glued in some jump rings because I did not have any eyelets and it was a bit late to order some online, so yeah, this was the next best thing I could think about. After doing a test on a strand of faux leather that you can see on top there, I decided to use some nail temporary tattoos that I had on hand to decorate the corset. I started applying these temporary tattoos, not realizing that the corset was upside down, but I think it turned out okay nonetheless. I went with a floral design, mainly roses and leaves. They didn't seem to want to pop at all when I moved the corset, but just to be safe I added a few coats of diluted matte mud Podge just to protect them. I then made a quick pair of high-waisted black panties with the stretchy fabric, mainly because I wanted to leave most of the legs bare for the next step. Because yes, the next step was the hardest part of this whole project, and if you've been following me for a while, you may question my sanity in a minute. We're going for thigh-high lace-up high-heel boots in black. So making shoes from scratch is the very bane of my existence, and I don't know what possessed me, but I went for it stubborn and also terrified. I had a coat that I wasn't wearing anymore that were in thin faux leather, and I thought that I could somewhat whip up a base and use that to cover the legs. So far I had terrible results trying to use Warbler to make shoes, so I grabbed my foam clay thinking that I would at least try to make something, try to make a base. And by some Christmas miracle to Hurley, I was actually able to make something both decent and durable by layering foam clay, strengthening it with masking tape and Mod Podge, and adding a sole made of cardboard. And of course there's a bit of wire in the heel too, just for strength, and you'll excuse my lack of documentation over the whole thing. I mainly spent hours upon hours trying things to make those shoes, and well, I made some more for an upcoming project using the same materials and techniques, and I made sure to document it well in this time, so my apologies, you're not gonna get that today, but next time I promise. Though sadly it was not the end of my troubles, because unfortunately as I tried working with the leather that I had, I quickly realized it wasn't of a good quality, or maybe it's because it was too old, but it flaked at nothing and it was absolutely impossible to use for what I had in mind. This was extremely frustrating, especially knowing how expensive that coat had been, and I was running out of options. Until an angel named Simakai appeared to me. Simakai is an amazing friend of mine, and she's an amazing seamstress that makes awesome hoodies for a living and amazing cosplays for fun. She sent me some higher quality pleather, and since we both live in the same general area, this came in really fast in the mail and it saved my butt quite literally. I am very grateful for her help. please do me a solid and go look at her Ko-fi page. I'll leave the link in the description box below. She sells amazing stuff and she has ton of Pride theme hoodies that she makes all by hand by herself, and it's all size inclusive. I highly recommend it. I have one of hers and I plan on getting another soon. With that said, let's go back to the boots. So I traced the shape of the leg with a generous allowance on paper, and then I used that as a template and cut that shape twice, making sure those two shapes would mirror each other. I did that on, well, the plitter I just received. Once that was done, I placed them facing each other with the good sides in, and I added a seam on the back of the boot all the way down, and including the back of the curve of the heel. You want to avoid making excess holes in this kind of fabric, so I did not use pins. I did not add suitable clips on hand either, so I improvised using painter's tape. It's also recommended to not backstitch, but I was careful to reuse the holes as I went back. I just feel like this would be a stronger stitch. I would have considered a good fabric adhesive, but I didn't have any on hand. After trying that piece on the doll wearing the base shoe, I trimmed some excess glitter on the toes, as I will be gluing that part down. I am looking at boots online for the style. I made sure to also correct my template so I can make the outer boot exactly the same after this one. Before gluing the side piece though, I first went in and glued some glitter on the whole shoe to cover it, so it's all the same texture. Using Mod Podge here was fine, but in retrospect I would argue that all glue might be a better option. I cannot find any footage for it, I'm sorry, but I also cut a long rectangular strip as the tongue of the boot, and I glued it down second, then I added the side piece you saw me cut and sew previously. I also, as you can see, took some time to add a couple of decorative stitches and add some more jump rings for the like of eyelets. To make sure that the pleather would not tear on me as I laced the boots, I also added a strip of black fabric on the inside of the shoe, just on the side, and just to solidify that area, that specific part, where I will pass the thread that I will use as shoelace. There is also a small rounded triangular piece here glued on the top of the heel as well, and it is purely decorative. I looked at various shapes and designs of boots to make sure I did something that looked nice and clean despite my obvious lack of shoemaking sense, if I may. And I'm honestly very proud of myself and genuinely surprised, and I can't believe I made these myself. To continue with the look, which feels very much inspired by early 2000s visual kei fashion and the BGD sold at the time, I made gloves, which are simply a rectangular of pleather with the same lace and ribbon that I used on the top. Next I went on and finally added some paint to cover the epoxy sculpt color and blend in the body modification into the doll's skin tone. I also lightly blushed the upper body much the same way I did the face. I would later add a bit of blushing to the thighs too, something I should have done before I sewed the clothes on the doll, but yeah, the plastic on the head is to protect it and the hair from MSC. I then started the long and tedious process of dressing the doll and sewing some of the clothes and adjusting them for the perfect fit. I used some white satin ribbon to lace the corset, and I did most of it off camera because I had to pull quite hard on my needles, and I popped some jump rings and I had to glue them back down. I reassure you, nothing popped when I laced the boots, because that pleather was so thin that I was able to effortlessly add a few stitches to the jump rings. These though, I laced using a good black, high quality embroidery floss. The train was sewn directly on the top. And then I move on to the glove, which I decided were to be laced with more of that embroidery floss that I just previously used. The finished outfit was very much in my taste, but it lacked a lot in details, so I looked into what I had on hand and see what could look nice. I thought about gems or strips of pleather or more lace or even some metallic chains that I could dangle here and there. I've used a lot of glued gem in the past, and I think I went to a point that it actually became a little tacky on some of my creations, and it cooled me off a little, I must admit that. I was a little apprehensive and unsure about using some here. That doll was turning into the PGD dream fantasy that I never was able to afford more than a decade ago, and I wasn't going to do anything that I wasn't really happy with. After adding details that you'll see at the reveal, all that was left for me was to screw those big angel wings on the back of this doll. I first marked where I wanted the screws to go with a regular pencil, and I tried my best to make sure that these lined up perfectly. Then using a small artist knife, I made small indents in the plastic just to make sure that the screws won't slide around as I try to secure the wings. And after recruiting the help of the tiniest screwdriver I had on hand, I was able to secure the wings tightly, finally finishing one of the most time-consuming dolls I ever customized. I'm honestly very happy. I think this is my best custom doll so far. I had many pictures that I liked, so I added a lot of them to this video. There was so many details that I added to this project that I could not list everything in this video, even if it's more than 40 minutes long. I really hope you enjoyed. Of course, this doll is not for sale, but I am hoping to do bigger dolls in the future, absolutely. Maybe one day I'll bring up the courage to try to find one of my BGDs on this channel. Now please, please, please go on and visit the other artists in this collab. Look at that composite picture, we all did amazing, we all did great. I'm so personally excited at the idea of watching everyone's video, and I hope you are too. Now then folks, I hope you are all safe. Have an amazing spooky season. I'll see you very soon in my next video. But until then though, please, stay safe.